ladies and gentlemen, members of the jury, members of the Roll the Tape film crew. Well, Tim Bradley conducted another interview with, I believe, FightHype.com. And we don't have to regurgitate the history or rehash the history of Tank Davis and Tim Bradley, because Tim Bradley has publicized his thoughts about Tank Davis over 1 year ago, last year, and I've literally published I published the interview in a video that I also published last week and a half ago, where Tim Bradley have some personal issues with Tank Davis. Considerably, a lot of the behaviors that Tank Davis has displayed outside of the ring. Not inside of the ring as a professional boxer, but outside of the ring. Some circumstances that have caused Tank Davis to be in legal trouble or have some form of contact with law enforcement. We won't rehash that. So we know where Tim Bradley stands personally with Tank Davis, because he told everybody in that interview last year, which I played those words and rolled the tape on it, that he don't like Tank Davis. Like as a human being, like as a person, he don't like Tank Davis. So we already know that every time Tank Davis's name come up to Tim Bradley, when he's asked about Tank Davis in any interviews, you know that what he says about Tank most of the time is not going to be favorable towards Tank Davis. Now, in this interview, though, that was published yesterday, I believe the interview was conducted after Tim Bradley got off of the airwaves as he was commentating on ESPN. Tim Bradley said that Tank Davis was a 30-year-old prospect. And the reason why he said that is because he was making comparisons to Tank Davis's resume. Basically saying that Gervonta Tank Davis hasn't fought A-level competition. He said that Tank Davis fought guys who had to go through the rehydration clause process, i.e. Ryan Garcia. He talked about how Tank Davis fought guys who possibly was much smaller than him. He also talked about how Tank Davis fought guys who were naturally bigger than him, but he made them drain their weight to fight him so that he can have an advantage. And basically, because Tank Davis's career is doing so well, it's only because, yes, he's talented in the ring. Tim Bradley will acknowledge that. But also, it's because of the level of competition. So that's why Tim Bradley called Tank Davis a 30-year-old prospect. Tim Bradley also mentioned another thing that was more alarming to me when I heard it, when he referenced Tank Davis. He said that Tank Davis is a part of PBC protective custody. That's what I heard Tim Bradley say. So I want to address the 30-year-old prospect comment, and I also want to address PBC protective custody. Now, let me say this. I'm just going to preface my statements with this. Tim Bradley keeps it 100. He gives his truth. We got to call a spade a spade. That's why I respect Tim Bradley. But Tim Bradley has the right to express his thought process and have his own perspective. No matter if people agree with Tim Bradley or not, we all have the privilege and the right to express our perspective. So Tim Bradley shouldn't be criticized. I just want to use his 2 comments to shed light on the business of boxing to educate you. And here it is. So let's start with the 30-year-old prospect comment that Tim Bradley made referring to Tank Davis. 30-year-old prospect. When we look at the business of boxing, I just want to make sure that I lay the foundation so we all can be on the same page. When we look at the business of boxing, right? Even though a lot of these competitive fights that boxing fans, you all, the boxing community, the boxing fans want to see right now, even though these competitive fights are competitive and you want to see them right now, there's a lot of times in boxing that we don't see the fights that we all want to see right away. I'm talking about those competitive fights, right? And one of the main reasons why is because of timing. Timing is one of the most, if not the most critical element in the sport and in the business of boxing. I'm talking about outside of the ring. I'm not talking about timing inside of the ring when we talk about the fighters competing against one another, right? I'm not talking about that type of timing. I'm talking about the timing to materialize fights. There's so many nuances involved in the process of not just building an event, but also materializing fights behind the scenes. So when Tim Bradley says that Tank Davis is a 30-year-old prospect and he's basing his thought process on Gervonta Tank Davis's resume, I mean, let's keep it all the way 100 and be honest. Every professional boxer, you can name them. You can go all the way back to 1960 to now 2024. And I can assure you that every professional boxer that became either a world champion or contended for a world championship title in every weight class have fought at least one fighter that was overmatched in their career and on their resume. That's a fact because of how the business of boxing works. So no one is innocent as a professional fighter with fighting top-level competition every single time they got and stepped in that ring, including Timothy Bradley. Let's just keep it all the way 100. I'll give you an example. Shout out to Mr. Pragmatic. Because Mr. Pragmatic and I were talking recently about, let's say, Marvin Hagler, who fought 11 times in 1 year. I think it was 8 in like 2 or 3 months. Marvin Hagler fought 11 times, y'all. I'm talking about in the beginning, before he even contended for a world title. This is how the business of boxing is designed, because what it does for the promoter and the fighter, it provides longevity, right? Let me give you an example when I say provide longevity. Just quickly, if you have somebody like, let's say Tank Davis, right? Cash cow, face of boxing. You have Tank Davis get in the ring and fight 3 straight top level competition. I'm talking about 3 straight top level competition fights. And I'm not talking about no fights that we know for a fact he's going to win. I'm talking about fights where it's like 3 killers, 3 power punchers, 3 killers, young, aggressive, undefeated killers, 3 times in a row. Not only do you have to consider what that would do for Tank Davis's career if he lost 3 straight, or let's say get knocked down and knocked out 3 straight fights in a row, but what does it do for the promoter who invested money, a lot of money, in 3 straight fights? And then Tank Davis's loss not only puts him in the back of the line in that division, but also it hurts the promotion. And I'm not just talking about just the 3 fights that the promoters invested their money in to receive a return on their investment. I'm talking about the monies that they also invested in Tank Davis to get up to those 3 fights in the first place. And those are the elements that most boxing fans and boxing YouTubers don't consider, because you're not supposed to consider it, because you don't understand and know the business of boxing. This is where I come in at. So I can fill in the gap between what you're seeing in Tank Davis's career or any fighter's career and what Tim Bradley is actually saying. Because every fighter has fought multiple fights against overmatched opponents where we knew as boxing fans before those fighters got into the ring that they were going to win. Because if that is the case, that fighters get in that ring and fight 3 straight killers, I'm talking about back to back to back, not only does it hurt the career of the fighter, but watch what this does to the public. Watch what this does and the effect that it will have on that boxing fan. You're not going to want to buy any more pay-per-views from a fighter who just got knocked out 3 straight times. A fighter that you were a fan of 3 straight consecutive times. You're going to lose hope in the product. And you're going to look for a different product. If the 3 fights where your favorite fighter was completely dominated in, you're going to lose hope. You're not going to want to pay your hard-earned money for a boxing ticket to a 10-day event or even a pay-per-view to see your favorite fighter get in a 4th fight and possibly get knocked out. It's just the nature of who we are as human beings. Boxing, just like sports in general, but boxing in particular, is a sport of what have you done for me lately? And if your favorite fighter becomes undefeated and then get in a fight where 3 fights that they're in, they get completely dominated and or knocked out, at some point, your interest in seeing that fighter compete is going to wane. And that's just the reality of how sports is. And that's just relatable to all sports. And so that is what happens in boxing. And promoters and fighters lose revenue. They lose fan interest when losses occur, especially in dominating fashion. And the thing that I want to say about Tim Bradley's comment is, if Tim Bradley's going to point it out, if he's going to say this about Tank Davis, then he has to equally have that same energy for Terrence Crawford and everybody else, including himself. Let's just keep it 100. If you're going to use this barometer about protective custody, and I told y'all this in the last video a week and a half ago, if that is the barometer that we're going to use, or that Tim Bradley is going to use for Tank Davis, according to Tank Davis's resume, then he has to use it for every other fighter. Because I can apply that same prospect comment. I can apply that to 10 fighters right now, right off the cuff. Right now. And so can you. Now, second thing, Tim Bradley used the term PBC, protective custody. If that's his opinion, I respect it. That's cool. To each his own. But that comment alone wasn't the origin of Tim Bradley's thought process a year ago, 2 years ago. And the reason why I'm saying that, because I haven't heard him. I'm not saying I saw every interview that Tim Bradley conducted, because I didn't. But I haven't heard Tim Bradley use the term protective custody a year or two ago. And he probably had, but I haven't heard him. So the moment that I first initially heard Tim Bradley use that term, PBC, protective custody, the first thing I thought about was a YouTuber. Somebody on YouTube said that first. And guess what? When I say on YouTube, I'm not talking about a content creator. I'm talking about people in the comments section, a boxing fan. Sounds like something that a boxing fan would say, a non-content creator would say in the comments section. Because all of you boxing fans in the comments section, especially on my channel, all of you have a sense of creativity. Some negative, some positive. Because I've gotten some of the best nicknames in the history of boxing from my comments section, from boxing fans, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody in the comments section used the term protective custody for Tank Davis, and maybe a content creator even could have made that term up, right? That's cool too. But either way, it seems like to me, this is what it seemed like to me, that Tim Bradley heard that from somewhere else. And then he's repeating that. And I'm not saying that's not his genuine feeling. I believe it is. But that sounds like a YouTube boxing term, protective custody, when we talk about fighters, including Tank Davis. So I just wanted to put that out there real quick, because the bottom line is this. Every fighter done been in protective custody. If they're in the Hall of Fame, guess what? They've been in protective custody. If they're a world champion, they've been in protective custody. And I'm talking about in the past and even the present. You can name one fighter. Just name one. Name one fighter who has not been in protective custody, where every time they stepped in the ring, it was against A-level competition. Just name one. Go from 1960 all the way to 2024. And guess what? You gotta give me at least 3 fights. Back to back to back, I'm talking about. Consecutive fights. 3 consecutive fights. Where they were in the ring with a fighter that you said to yourself, oh, this A-level competition that they're fighting, they're going to destroy them. And they actually came out and did it. It's hard to get wins. This is the point that I'm really bringing home. It's very difficult for fighters, A-level fighters versus A-level fighters. It's difficult to win consecutive fights against A-level competition when you're also as equally as good as your opponent. It's tough. It's really tough. As the level of opposition and competition increase in boxing, the risk is much greater for the promoter and the fighter. And so when you have the elements that I just described involved in a fighter's career, you got to think about the business side of it. It's all about longevity, to prolong the career of the fighter and to sustain the investment and the marketability of that fighter. And I want to leave you all with this fact. When we talk about Tank Davis fighting the fighters that he's fought so far, because I heard Tim Bradley mention Shakur Stevenson, right? or world championship caliber fighters. And somebody might say, oh, man, well, he struggled in the beginning of his fights and then he'd knock you out. That's true, too. But check this out. Tank Davis don't need a unification bout. Tank Davis don't need no belts. Tank Davis don't need to get in the ring and fight A-level competition. You know why he don't need none of this? Because even without it, the numbers don't lie. Even without a unification title fight that Tank Davis never been in a unification bout yet, where all the belts was on the line. I'm talking about undisputed. Undisputed. You know why? Because he don't need that. Some fighters need the belts. Some fighters do need that now. But Tank Davis, $5.2 million live gate. I'm just going by what we were told. $5.2 million of live gate ticket sales at the Barclays Center in New York. $5.2 million live gate ticket sales. Capital One Arena in D.C. $23 million live gate ticket sales in Las Vegas. When you have a fighter of this magnitude that can generate that much revenue, not just for him or herself, but for the promotion company, for the community, for the hotels, for the restaurants. Should I continue? For the airlines. We can keep this going now. For the networks, for streaming platforms, for YouTube boxing creators, content creators. When a guy can generate this much attention and this much revenue, and look, check this out, and can do it without fighting A-level competition 3 fights in a row, sound like good business to me. Because even at 30 years old, he's still got a couple of more years left in him to grow and go to greater heights as far as revenue is concerned, because he didn't take the punishment. His body has not succumbed to wear and tear in consecutive fights. And he can still maximize his earning potential. And if you want to even more understandable reference, look at Terrence Crawford. Terrence Crawford, believe it or not, almost 40 years old. You wouldn't be able to tell. You want to know why? Because he didn't fight 3 consecutive killers that hurt his career and hurt his body and hurt his revenue earning potential. But instead, it increased his revenue earning potential as time progressed. That's just the nature of the business of boxing. So I just wanted to, you know what, I'm doing way too much talking. Don't take my word for it. Roll the tape.